Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm 10 minutes late. I was on the phone with a lawyer who's familiar with traffic safety, the Traffic Act, and everything else. Just had a nasty ticket there that I rightfully didn't deserve. So I'm going to be fighting that, but I'm not going to let that ruin my presentation here that's very important for all of you. So I see people are logging on. Hello. Again, sorry, everybody, I'm late. Had to take care of some business. I was on the phone. We're going to get in today about WTO, a specific branch of theirs on land use, property rights. They go into great detail on this. Beautiful reports spanning the last anywhere from 80 years in one half of a report all the way up to just the last 40 years. But both are impressive, great numbers. And we're going to do a comparative analysis that I've been working on for Alberta. And now I'm going to compare that to WTO's China. So I'm going to take the province of Alberta versus China right now and everything out of this WTO report. So to begin with, we're going to look at just how much land is inhabitable or inhabited in China versus how much land is actually inhabited in Alberta. 27% of China is inhabited currently. 26% of Alberta is inhabited currently. We have another higher percentage taking us up to 30%, but that's Métis settled lands. They're officially the largest private property owner in Alberta. China has absolutely zero property rights whatsoever. They only lease by the Communist Party. They're communism. There is no individual property ownership in China. You can lease from the state. Those terms are 20 to 120 years. So you can inherit a lease agreement from a parent or grandparent or what have you by any means willed to you, okay? In Alberta, we have property taxes on any private property we own. We have death taxes, and we also have inheritance tax should you receive property from a deceased family member or friend or however means that you receive that through a will. A big interesting point here is zero point 0.2 of an acre is held by, there's lease owners in China. 0.2% of an acre is actual leaseholders in China of all inhabited land. And when you look at, there's 1.3 billion Chinese, that's a very small amount of official leaseholders. So when we look at 0.2 of an acre, you can say, well, that's your average city single unit dwelling with detached or attached garage, the average property size, about 8,700 square feet. But what people aren't understanding with that with China is when you look at the WTO numbers, there's businesses, manufacturing, there's all the corporate farms, and that's all added in. And interesting enough, when you compare Alberta, anybody at a 0.2 of an acre, which has grown quite a bit over the same time period as China in leaseholders, it's 0.2% of an acre. And we have quite a large number of growth in that, people buying homes in cities and urban development at that exact same number, 0.2% of an acre. However, anything larger than that, ownership in Alberta since all the way back to 1910 has actually declined. It's continually declined and declined and declined. More and more Albertans are in the 0.2 of an acre or less. You're getting more ownership of a lot less of Alberta's land. Most of that 26%, a large majority of it, is actually going into further less and less hands, meaning farmers are disappearing, large manufacturing or corporate farms are taking over. It's just a group of owners in larger and larger. Outside of a 0.2 of an acre, you're going to see the property rights change from many farmers or many small business owners into the hands of actually a very, very few. And then you get into business owners, but they're actually leasing from a property owner who happens to own quite a bit. And we see that with the city of Edmonton, Calgary, and a lot of other municipalities, as well as we're watching farms become larger and larger in ownership of only one or two individuals. And that's the great change that's occurring here, exactly at the same rate as China. It's unbelievable. When you start looking at these stats, you start to see Alberta changing into literally a China. The only difference is we have what are called property rights, supposed to be, but we're watching our provincial legislatures take away all of your constitutional rights to that property, namely the natural resources. One right here in Alberta, 1929, and officially enacted in 33 officially, but we're watching many, many Albertans lose their rights to those resources and the deals they had. Our provincial government under Jason Kenney just this year took that away from over 9 constituencies in rural Alberta. We're going to literally watch over the next year in property taxes, many Albertans fold up tents, and we're going to see consolidation into that one major player, that one owner. And this has been going on the same rate as China since 1952 for China, but it's the same rate from Alberta from 1910, and exponentially over this year. We're going to watch a lot of property transfer hands and end up consolidated into less and less owners. Now, if you look at how many people own property, more Albertans than ever own property. Just as China can say, we have more Chinese than ever having leases. However, it's all under zero point 0.2 of an acre, and the vast majority of people are renting. That number has tripled in both China and Alberta. These are interesting facts nobody can dispute. We exist where China has this state land. Alberta has what's called Crown land because Alberta doesn't want to settle the claims with the Indigenous First Nations treaties. They have done Métis comparatively to the rest of Canada. That hasn't been done anywhere else in Canada, was done in Alberta. But literally, we're only utilizing 26% of Alberta for any kind of private property ownership. To gain access to the rest of the Crown land, which is exactly what state China's administering for over 70% of their lands, keeping everybody in a small area and upping the costs, whether they want to go through lease. They keep condensing everybody into smaller lands while making those lands extremely expensive. Alberta's doing the exact same thing. Canada's been utilizing this because they don't want to settle First Nations claims. They want to increase the population at a higher and faster and much exponential rate, exactly as China has done. They are following what looks like to be the exact same model. Now, UK is an island country. They've been doing this as well too. They're exponential in the growth of a very small region of 5 countries that they keep exponentially growing through their immigration and former colonial system where they're getting all of their immigration through. And then they're now trying to pass it off into Canada. Canada is a vast territory, a vast country, one of the largest countries in the world. However, over 70% of Canada is absolutely not to be habited because it's sitting in limbo, because Canada and the provinces don't wish to settle the claims. So we're sitting just exactly as China is until we do that. There's not a great mass majority of First Nations. A settlement could be reached. There's no way anyone's going to be able to pay out $1 trillion. That's reality. That is now a myth. And unfortunately for First Nations, they're being strung along on a lie that isn't reality for Canada. It hasn't been since 1948 officially with the construction of the UN. UK passed off Canada as its own administered country, leaving a lot of this in limbo and in place for Canada to settle the claims. They choose not to. In fact, they choose to follow what looks clearly to be an exact copy of what China has been doing since 1952. Canada is doing the exact same thing. And you can literally, Alberta, the most settled, which still has a very, very long way to go, administers almost what appears to be an exact copy of what's happening in China, minus the massive population. But that's exactly what's going on here. These are real numbers. I'm going to be presenting all of this in great detail for all of you going forward. It's absolutely accurate. It's 100%. And it's up to each and every one of you to start pressing your government now to see the claims settled so that we can open up Alberta as it is for all the people. Because you're only going to end up in the same scenario as the Chinese. Whether you're a First Nation or whether you're an immigrant to Canada, we all were at some point. The reality is these claims need to be settled, and we can't follow the same narrative as China. And you're all allowing your Canadian federal and your provincial elected officials, especially right here in Canada or in Alberta. I give this comparative analysis just for Alberta. In actuality, if you compare the rest of the provinces, they are much, much worse than China is today. They're much worse. Alberta is the best comparison, and we're still a percentage point of habitability below China. Can you believe that? A communist country. And that's the reality of what we're going through in Alberta. And literally, like I said, the numbers of actual property rights for anybody below 0.2 of an acre, the numbers have grown, meaning more Albertans in less land, increasing that value of private land. Meanwhile, those over the 0.2 of an acre, it's less and less per person per capita Albertans. That's reality. And literally, this is what the government is doing to each and every one of you. It's another form of devaluation. It's another form of taking away your rights to your civil liberties, i.e. property, and absolutely compromise your businesses for all domestic Albertans. To end this, to change direction, we absolutely have to settle those claims. We've done it for Métis. We led Canada in that field. And no premier since that time has even bothered to go forward or press the federal government. Because the reality is they want to keep the slavery. They want to oppress the people. And they most certainly are following a communist China style system. Call it what you want. Say it's private property rights. But I promise you, all Albertans specifically, you're now reduced to the absolute lowest royalty rates in all of North America, including Mexico. Likewise, around the world, in all democratic states where there is official property rights outside of the civil law socialist countries, 70% of the world, you have the absolute lowest rates of royalties and respect for your resources than almost any democratic nation in the world today. That's a fact. We are literally 1 percentage point away from being exactly like China. Call it private property rights, but as you're paying these property taxes and not afforded any rights to any of your resources, really, you're just almost exactly the same. Call it private property with all these gross abuses, but really you're almost exactly like China. And if they continue to double the population, you're literally going to be worse. Chinese are officially 5 times less value than the average Canadian. Unfortunately, and Albertan, specifically Albertan. Unfortunately, they're also massively more densely populated in a lot less space than you all are. Think about that. That this is what they've done to the value of you in the land that you are able to have some type of property rights, which is so much lower than any other democratic region in almost the entire world. And we're going to get into that in the coming weeks, number by number, breakdown by breakdown. So thanks everybody for joining in. Sorry I was late. A little bit of personal problems there with a local law enforcement, but this is the presentation. It will be backed up in absolute data from the WTO, specifically their land, and it's also going to be backed up by a whole number of experts from other organizations around this world that are absolutely credible. So thanks for joining me today. Get this shared out. This is important for all people to realize. It's important to get together with First Nations and get this done. It's an absolute, or you're only going to watch an erosion of your rights until you are almost identical to China. We're only one percentage point away right now. And you can call it private property, but it's not really. When the small amount of private property that Alberta is allowed to utilize becomes a less and less for more and more people that you're allowed to have and own at a far greater cost, an overvaluation, which means property taxes, which is no different than the Chinese lease. And if you don't have the rights to those resources, as we're watching 9 regions lose this year, what is the major difference? There really isn't any. Stay tuned for the graphs, the presentations, literally from the WTO and other world experts in economics, as I bring those forward and bring Alberta's stats released, covering even from 2007 upwards from Stelmach all the way to Jason Kenney 2020 today. And you get to all see it in real living color, in real numbers, and where we've gone from then till now comparatively to a country like China. Thanks everybody. Take care now. Have a great day.